what's happening? Welcome to the Pleasure Points Podcast, New Year's edition, or almost New Year's edition. I'm your host, James Rohr. Thank you so much for being here. I have just so much to be thankful for this year. You know, moving, I think about where I was a year ago, stuck in New York, feeling like I was stuck in New York, in the office, like not having any idea what was going to happen, trying to convince Jen to leave her amazing place on the beach in South Florida to exchange for, life in Brooklyn, because I just felt so stuck there. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I knew in my bones that something had to change, so we just kind of like held it in our thoughts and whatever, that something might change in that next year. And, really we went into the new year, it was like January and February. And it wasn't until February that I came down to South Florida, and it was just one of those, like, the perfect sequence of things. The weather in New York had been shit. I'd been like just tired from working so much. And then the weather in Florida was like perfect. The beach was perfect. I came back tan. I felt great. And I was down there and I was just like, I can't ask you to leave this. And like, what am I doing in New York? And then, that just kind of got everything in motion. And, now to be here, whatever that is, 10 months later, and, living down here now and married and setting up a life and doing all of that, it was all pretty unexpected. And if you'd asked me, or if you told me that, a year ago this was going to happen, I would have thought, no way. And, I'm not going to, this podcast isn't about, like how to hack your New Year so that you can be great, but I'm filled with gratitude, and I'm grateful for the podcast, for all of you guys that listen, and for being out here. And one of the things that has really struck me from really being able to focus both in doTERRA and also my coaching business, even more so than I ever saw doing acupuncture, is how much suffering there is in the world. It's such an obvious and kind of a trite thing to say, and I don't know how to say it in a way that doesn't come across that way. But, what's interesting is that I'll do some advertising. I'll do some advertising on social media. And so that means that, I can get calls from everybody. And the thing that distinguishes that's different from acupuncture is that, like, in acupuncture, you're in a certain neighborhood. The fact that it's acupuncture, like, you're kind of self-selecting people that have a particular mindset for alternative help and alternative treatments and all of that. They know that there's a price point associated with it. So a phone call might sort of like sort out those people that are looking for like a $5 treatment. But by offering a free call to, connect with people, to help them get clear on the best next steps and all of that, has allowed me to like interact with so many more people. And on those calls that we get clarity on, people, they open up and they share what's not working in their lives. I'm so grateful for that opportunity to hear. And it's been just incredibly humbling especially, I've been doing this for years now, but especially in this last year, as I've been able to devote full time to the coaching. Just the depth of like pain and horrible shit that is out there that people are putting up with. And, there's that saying, you never, be kind to people because you never know like what, kind of demons they're battling or what they've gone through and whatever. And yeah, it's that. It's absolutely that. The trauma, the abuse, the gaslighting, the narcissism, the sociopathy, like all of that stuff, and it's like to look around and be like, wow, like people are surviving and they're enduring, and the level of just even courage and tenacity to get to this point is just absolutely tremendous. And so as we wrap up this new year and look ahead to the next year, I wanted to just take a moment to really honor and to celebrate those of you who are hurting, who are suffering, who might feel really alone. Because it's fucking hard this life when you don't feel good. And to not feel good and to be not feeling good in a way that may not be so outwardly visible. I see you. I celebrate you. Those of you that I've spoken with, thank you for giving me that opportunity. I hope you found our interaction to be helpful. And if you're just listening, a casual listener, you're stumbling on this podcast, thank you for being here and thank you for being on the planet, because we all get to learn from each other. And if you're hearing this and you're feeling great, if you've had a phenomenal year and you're just so full of joy and gratitude like I am about my last year, then that's awesome. Let's take a moment and just open our hearts and spread that love and compassion for those people who may be hurting. And I'm not talking about like in third world countries and all of that kind of like do good bullshit. I mean, it's there, it's helpful. Okay, fine, whatever. But I'm talking about like our neighbors, the people that you might be interacting with all the time. Maybe you're even married to one or raising one. Someone in your household might be suffering. And so maybe, if we can just kind of open our hearts to vibrate a little differently, or to possibly be open to attuning or to feeling the intuitive hits or the paying attention to some of those intuitive things that may have been coming to us that we didn't really want to hear or admit that might be there. And if that's you, if you're attuning to yourself, then beautiful. Thank you for having the courage to do that. And so I'm not going to talk about all the resolutions and all that kind of bullshit that comes up around the start of the year. I want to take this opportunity to celebrate the hardships, those things that are building grit, building your resilience, that are forging you into the powerful person that you are. And I think back to when I used to be really sick, and I fucking hated it when people would say stuff like that. Yeah, I remember I would just sit there and I'd ask myself, why? Why am I so sick? Why? Right? I was obsessed with that question of why. And I'd hear stuff like, this is when I was at acupuncture school, they'd be like, well, it's going to make you a better practitioner, and think about all the empathy that you're going to have for people that are sick, and, think about what you're learning and all that stuff. And I just used to be so pissed. I don't give a shit about any of that stuff. Like, if I don't help anybody, but I feel better, like, I would choose that life. Perhaps because I had that stance was, partly why I didn't heal so quickly. Yeah, I was not exactly focused on altruism. It's hard when you don't feel good. It was hard for me when I didn't feel good. I showed up for my clients and my patients, but it was still challenging. And I just used to say, I hated that. Like, think about what you're learning. And they meant the best. And look, I've said some things to like that also, because there is value in gratitude. There's massive value in gratitude. In fact, it's the thing that seems to show up time and time and time again when it comes to what is the best way to heal. What is the best way to transform your physiology? What is the best way to break those cycles of shame, of guilt, of depression, of sadness, of grief? And that's to come back to gratitude. And, I don't know if I could go back and tell myself, when people would say, oh, think about what you're learning, and how great that's going to be. That for me just didn't quite hit the mark. But, I think what I would say is I would just ask myself, what can you be grateful for in this moment? What's working well? one of my favorite books. This is a book I read I think it was probably the first book on just straight up mindfulness that I ever read, by Jon Kabat-Zinn, who was a real pioneer of the mindfulness movement here in the States. And it was this book called Full Catastrophe Living. Dramatic title, but I was feeling that. And, this podcast is for those of you that might have also been there or might even be there now. And so that book, one of the things that he says is he goes, we start off with the premise that if you're able to read this book or come to our offices or an event that we're hosting, that there is more right with you than there is wrong. And I remember reading that, and it was it hit me, and I was just like, oh, that's awesome. And then I was also like, yeah, but when one thing is wrong and gets really wrong, I don't know that holds up. I started looking for kind of holes in that stance. But it's tough sometimes to think about when we've gone through some things that are challenging. But that approach of there's more right with you than there is wrong, I've come to really appreciate that, because the tendency is just to be so fixated, for me anyway, was to be so fixated on what's not working well that I missed all of the other things that were actually working pretty well. I didn't have any respiratory issues. My sinuses were clear. My sleep was always good. Energy levels would fluctuate, but I would have times when I felt nice. And bringing that perspective, sort of chunking everything down to one moment after the next. I know it's a cliche, and yet that's the jam. That's where everything is in this moment, what can I contribute into the world? In this moment, what can I be grateful for? And even if it's something as simple as I can take a breath here. Thank you. It brings, it can take us out of that catastrophizing of the future, right? Am I going to be able to pay my bills? Am I going to be able to eat? Am I even going to have the will to live? And it just brings it back to, well, in this moment, what is the opportunity that's here? Or to quote one of my favorite movies of all time, baby steps. Baby steps to the elevator, baby steps into the elevator, baby steps out of the office, right? What About Bob? It's an amazing movie. There's so much greatness in there. And wisdom in that simple thing of just taking baby steps. I don't walk around with a goldfish necessarily strung around your neck, but we can take baby steps. We can take baby steps to the next moment, and it's not always easy. I joke. I try to have a fun time on here because no one wants to listen to anything that's too heavy or fucking depressing. But in thinking about having a little New Year's send off here, I really just want to honor those of you that might have a broken heart right now. Those of you that might be afraid and scared, nervous about what the next year is going to bring, or the next hour, or the next day. And to know that I'm just a human being here who wants to acknowledge you and to celebrate you. And that I hope that you take another breath and another breath and another breath. And that some of those hopefully are easy. I don't know if I've told this story on the podcast before, but I used to live in this building here in Florida, and there was a guy that lived there with his sister. He was older gentleman, and he was very sick. He was clearly an alcoholic. He was always, having bottle in one hand and smoking cigarettes in the other, and very, very skinny and emaciated, and that's sort of like South Florida leathery from just being outside in the sun all the time. And he was so warm. He was so nice. It was back when I had cola, and, he was always so sweet to her. And we'd sit and we'd talk and visit. And every time that, it was time to end the conversation as we're walking away, he just says, have an easy day. And I love that because I'd never heard that before. And at the time I was just grinding and grinding and grinding. And I wasn't, I just wasn't giving myself much freedom of breath or of mental space, right? I was so focused on achieving. And that the thought of having just a straight up easy day, to set my aim and intention to have an easy day, was not something that was in my consciousness. And this guy saying it, who clearly hadn't had many easy days because he was, in the throes of alcoholism. Or maybe that made his days easier. I don't know. But he seemed to be carrying some weight around, some heaviness. But for him to just say, have an easy day, it still strikes me. So if you're out there and you're challenged, I hope that you might have an easy day. But, I'm not going to put my prayer in front of whatever your prayer is. But I can just say that, we're standing behind you, supporting you as you walk out into wherever you're going with your prayer. I think I've talked about it before in ceremonies. One of my favorite things is, with at least the people I've done this with, is that, they make it a point to not stand in front of you when you're walking with your prayer to like the place where you might do a vision quest, let's say, because they don't want to get in the way, right? It's your life. It's your voice. It's your heart. It's your prayer. But we can stand behind and support you. And so maybe, you'll have easier days. Maybe you'll have some easier moments. And if the hard times persist, I celebrate your courage and your tenacity, even if you don't feel courageous or tenacious, even if it feels like one day just sort of cascades into the next, that you're still here and that you're finding your feet. Even though you don't know what the next moment's going to bring. So it's with a huge heart that I celebrate you and all of you guys who are feeling good already. What do you need? You don't need any wishes from me. You're doing fine. So let's just spread a little love to those people who might be suffering, especially those who might be in your life who are suffering silently, who may not be talking about it, who may have put on a great face over the holidays, but inside, maybe it took a lot for you to get there. Maybe you're taking some medications. Maybe, it took you a couple days to muster up the energy to get ready to go. And those of you that are walking around with wounded hearts this year, or this time of year especially, may you have the courage and the strength that you need to remember yourself, to remember your divinity. And, I see this moment as a celebration, an opportunity to celebrate that you're here, and that we're all here together doing the thing. So thank you guys, as always. I'm so appreciative of those of you that are listening to the show, that have been with me on this last year and month or so, as we've got 50 some odd episodes out now. I love hearing from you. I love hearing your stories. pleasurepointspodcast@gmail.com. Hitting me up on Instagram at Inviting in Love for the coaching stuff, and at James E. Rohr for that's just my regular one. I love interacting with you on the social media platforms. And I'm forever grateful for you supporting the show, writing your reviews, sharing the episodes, and spreading the good word. So here's to hopefully an aligned and flow end of 2019, and ringing in 2020 with a healthy dose of courage, strength, and resilience, and a lot of love. So have a good one, and I will catch you guys next time.